Once they started looking aggressively, they found more, and it turns out there had already been quite a number out there. But with increased surveillance, we now noticed them better. Some of the guys at the NIH began doing research and said, you know, maybe it's these poppers that these guys are using. Now, what are poppers? I mentioned those earlier. These are alkylated nitrites. They're amyl or butyl nitrites. They go under various street names: poppers, rush, death rush, room. They are liquids. They're discovered over 100 years ago. They can be used for certain kinds of heart patients for relief of angina under emergency conditions. But basically, what these things are, they're very highly reactive volatile compounds. In the way they react chemically, they are similar to carbon monoxide or cyanide in that, and they have not a fairly similar reactivity. If you inhale them, see the liquids evaporate and they're inhaled into the lungs and so forth, they will destroy everything: hemoglobin, red blood cells, proteins, lipids, DNA, RNA. They mutate genes. They will cause cancer. They're related to compounds also definitely proved to cause cancer certainly in all kinds of laboratory animals. They're related to nitroxide compounds, which cause pneumonia in rats in the laboratories. Very, very serious stuff. When I've told chemistry professors about the fact that homosexuals, fast-lane male homosexuals in the fast-lane lifestyle were using these drugs, I've had twice now the reaction from chemistry professors: human beings are using that stuff? They couldn't believe it. It's extremely toxic, and you could easily die with that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's used very widely and has since been proven to destroy the T cells in mice, in laboratory mice, and deplete their immune systems in a way that's not unlike what in AIDS. There's a little bit of a lag time, and then finally when the mouse can't handle it, too much abuse, too many of these chemicals, and finally the immune system gives out, and the T cells disappear, and the mice lose their immune system. That's been proven. Nevertheless, so these NIH scientists were looking at that and saying, these poppers are an obvious candidate for what's going on. All of the first 50 AIDS cases, all of them admitted using poppers. Long-term, heavy amounts, 7 to 10 years on average, large doses, as many as 40 or 50 hits per night. Tremendous stuff. And you're talking about vast quantities of chemicals you're pouring in the body, and you're doing it several nights a week, 52 weeks a year, for 7 to 10 years. You do a lot of damage in that time if you survive and don't overdose. Now, the Centers for Disease Control recognized right away that they wanted this to be blamed on a virus. Their task force had as its goal to make it look like a new infectious disease rather than just a general problem of lack of health caused by certain drugs. So they went around and they could see it was only showing up. I mean, there's these number of these odd diseases, not so odd diseases, but comparatively, showing up in these male homosexuals ages 25 to 50. So the CDC knew that they had to make it look like it's spreading out of its primary risk group. So they looked up heroin addicts in San Francisco and in New York, Central Park, dying of their heroin addiction, wasting away as heroin addicts always have done, and opium addicts.
What about the people in Africa suffering from AIDS?
In Africa, it turns out that a portion of the U.S. Budget for foreign aid is given to Central African AIDS belt countries in proportion to the number of AIDS cases they report. So you can imagine what that does to AIDS statistics out of Africa. Naturally, now they're redefining anything they can find, starvation-associated diseases like tuberculosis and wasting disease that have been around for as long as we can document in Africa, and even diabetes, malaria, even automobile accidents are being registered as AIDS deaths in Africa to justify more money. You have whole AIDS industries there, guys driving around Mercedes-Benzes, nice Italian suits. They go to meetings of the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, in order to participate in the organization functions, and all of this financed by this tremendous AIDS budget. The African countries want those statistics up. They want to blame everything on AIDS. It turns out that when you simply feed African AIDS patients, they generally recover. It appears to be mostly starvation-induced. There are a few cases in the cities that may be prostitutes using drugs. Same in Thailand. It's just a handful of people there, very little AIDS there. The handful of people are all prostitutes smoking cocaine or heroin or opium. So we believe it's the drugs, therefore.
What about Arthur Ashe, the tennis star? And what about Kimberly Bergalis, the girl who contracted AIDS from her dentist?
The 3-year studies involving hundreds and thousands of people are now showing that those people who take AZT are not only not any better off, but in general it's pretty clear, even with obscuring the data in these papers, it's pretty clear those taking AZT are getting sick sooner and worse and dying of AIDS sooner than people who don't take AZT. Since 1987, it has been approved for treatment of AIDS, meaning it's accelerating the AIDS deaths of people, and since 1990 for the prevention of AIDS in otherwise healthy HIV-positive people. We believe this was the clear reason for the death of Arthur Ashe, the former tennis player who was HIV positive for a number of years and had no significant problems other than his pre-existing heart condition. But 4 years of AZT in the last 10 months, combination AZT-DDI, his immune system wasted and pneumonia, and he died. Same with the girl in Florida who supposedly got AIDS from her dentist, Kimberly Bragalis, who apparently the virus didn't even come from the dentist, but for that matter, we don't know if she might have had the virus pretty much all her life, maybe from birth. No one has investigated that. Centers for Disease Control wanted people to believe that it was a dentist-to-patient transmission to help get some legislation passed through Congress at the time. The publicity generated public fear and did get the legislation passed. And so everyone today believes that a dentist gave AIDS to a patient. But the dentist was a fast-lane male homosexual, apparently using all the drugs, dying with Kaposi sarcoma. Kimberly Bragalis had no problems until she began taking AZT. At that point, she developed a serious yeast infection, oral candidiasis. Then began developing opportunistic skin infections. She began getting pneumonias recurring. She began wasting away. And within somewhere between 1 and 2 years, she was in a wheelchair and then dead.
So the drugs prescribed to prolong the lives of people who are HIV positive are killing otherwise healthy people? And no one noticed that.
We think she died of the treatment AZT. Currently, nearly 200,000 people worldwide are using AZT or these other drugs on prescribed by doctors every day. And we believe this is causing and certainly preventing the curing of many AIDS cases. The last thing I'll simply say about this is that the only long-term AIDS survivors we have ever known, we have ever seen documented anywhere, every one of them avoids these treatments, AZT, the other 3 drugs. Also, I would avoid Epivir, the new drug that has come out. It's a protease inhibitor. It's a different category of drug, but believe you me, it'll hurt your pancreas, it may hurt your liver, it's going to be bad for you in any case, and it won't help, but it's supposed to attack a virus that isn't even there anymore. So how can it possibly help? And very expensive, and made by the same company that brought you AZT. Burroughs, welcome. Now, and it was also rushed through on fast-track approval without the proper testing. But the long-term survivors are people who don't take AZT and don't take these drugs. They get off the drugs, all the other drugs, the poppers, the cocaine, Quaaludes, heroin, whatever, and they start eating normal meals. And then they'll credit some of their recovery to various diets and herbs and vitamins and so forth. I don't know about that sort of thing, but I will say that by straightening up their act, that many of them are long-term survivors alive even today, 10 years or more after an initial diagnosis of full-blown AIDS. So this is how you survive. The problem is the politics here. The federal government has spent, as I say, about $40 billion in the war on AIDS, almost all of it on HIV, certainly everything since 1984 on HIV. And this amounts to about $7.5 billion per year. This means that there are thousands of scientists who are the AIDS researchers are absolutely committed to the virus. Their whole careers are built on it. It means that we've got the AIDS activist movement completely paid off with this money, the American Red Cross, hemophiliac organizations, government institutions. Elizabeth Taylor's foundation works with her. All of these people are getting money off the AIDS gravy train, so don't expect them to have any interest in this. Moreover, they don't want the gravy train to stop. They know that it exists only because you, the public, are scared to death of the deadly virus. You think that you can get infected, and we've got to finance this war against the deadly virus to help stave it off.
Now you know what has been going on behind the scenes in medicine, science, our government, our legal system, our media, and you can see what happens when bureaucracy replaces all of the above. And our schools. Ellison says that when advisors at the University of California at Berkeley found out about his HIV/AIDS research, they expelled him from his doctoral program shortly before he was to complete his doctoral work.
As a result, the scientists, as I mentioned at the beginning of this program, the very prestigious heavyweight scientists who are talking about this have encountered some amazing roadblocks. They have been severely punished for holding these views, and this is why you're not hearing about these views publicly. My co-author, Dr. Duesberg, a member of the National Academy of Sciences and prestigious virologist, one of the leading virologists of our day, if not the leading one, as some people have been inclined to call him, he lost his grant, his research grant. He's losing his lab. He's lost his graduate students. I was thrown out of graduate school right before I could file a thesis for my PhD in molecular biology, again because it was discovered I had written this book. And other scientists, Dr. Joseph Sonnabend was the very first scientist back in 1983 and 84 to challenge this virus view. He lost his grant. He lost his journal, which he founded on AIDS research. He was a very prestigious, very respected medical researcher, very important connections. He was severely punished, so much so that by the late 1980s he began going back to the other side, not for reasons of evidence, but because he wanted his money back. And he's finally gotten his grant back, and he has some position back because he has because he's defected back from our side. Dr. Duesberg appears to be going a similar process right now, and I've not really spoken with him in quite a while. But he's now dissociating himself from some of the books that he's co-authored, including mine and including another one out of Ohio on this subject. He does not yet recant his views, but it's possible that this could happen. He has been made offers, as it turns out, from the federal government. He would get his grants back and he would get prizes, whatever else he wants, if he would recant his views on HIV not causing AIDS. And there's tremendous pressure brought to bear on these other scientists. Only those who are retired and don't function off of grants have been able to resist the pressure consistently. We have 3 Nobel laureates, and again, they have encountered some pressure as well. So there's tremendous censorship brought to bear, tremendous pressure on the media not to cover the story. Journalists who cover it find themselves cut off from sources of information for news stories from the federal government. And this is not something I've invented. The fact is that the director, the de facto director by the federal government, or of the federal government's war on AIDS, Anthony Fauci, in the late 1980s wrote open editorial published in the AAAS newsletter, American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, in which he warned journalists, anyone who covers this AIDS debate and the scientists who question whether the AIDS is caused by this virus, any reporter who covers that will be isolated and frozen out of the loop. We won't give them any news, and you won't be able to hold a job with your newspaper. He said that openly, but he knows that the average American person doesn't read that. I document that again in my book, and along with a whole campaign of censorship, how every time one of us was about to be interviewed on Good Morning America, Larry King Live, Newsweek, magazine, CNN, magazines, newspapers, television, very often, most of the time, it has been censored, sometimes hours before broadcast. And with nobody left to substitute, they would bring in Anthony Fauci from the federal government to talk about AIDS and nothing else. So the debate is being kept quiet. We also wrote, or I wrote, this book, Why We Will Never Win the War on AIDS, precisely to document all of this. And we took that to one publisher after another. Most New York publishers were excited by the manuscript, but found it to be so controversial they were scared of it, wouldn't make an offer. We had 2 publishers in a row who signed contracts to publish and then backed out. Finally, in frustration, we published the book ourselves. Judge John E. Sprizzo of the Southern District of New York Federal Court issued a temporary restraining order, which is now being turned into a permanent injunction banning this book. As a result, as it stands right now, you will not be able to see this book. I can't sell it to you. I can't distribute it to you. I can't give it to you for free. If you think this is unreal, believe me, the lawyers who worked on this case and other lawyers who've talked about it cannot believe what happened. Basically, the judge very clearly was very hostile to us during the entire proceeding and broke the law repeatedly, has completely redefined contract law, redefined copyright law in order to enforce a contract that had no force or power so as to censor this book. So it's a very, very crazy situation.
Can we remove the power from those who have betrayed us? Yes, we can. Can we fix medicine, science, our government, our legal system, our media, our schools? Yes, we can.
Let's get to work. Brought to you by the Maine Porcupines Writers for a Better Tomorrow, 2011.